This happened back when I was still in high school, so I was about 16. My friends at the time, let's call them Jack and Dan, and I would often skip the last class or two in favor of hanging out at one of their places. My parents were more uptight about playing hooky, or cruising around in the old school muscle car that Jack had fixed up with his dad. One day we swung by a grocery store that had a place in back that made pretty good Chinese food, and that sounded like it would hit the spot right now. We parked, browsed the aisles a little, and picked up some sodas as our orders were being prepared. The three of us paid, and on the way out, I told them I had to take a leak, giving my bags to Jack to look after. The bathrooms were usually at least fair on the cleanliness scale, but I guess that day someone was asleep at the wheel, and no one had bothered to notify the staff of the mess inside. I was, and still am, somewhat shy while peeing, so I like to use stalls when able. The handicapped stall's toilet was filled to the brim with murky brown water and toilet paper, more wet paper clinging to almost every surface within 2 feet of the toilet. Yeah, no. The stall next to it was worse. Someone had been finger painting in there, so to speak. The final stall I checked, the one closest to the door, had urine all over the seat and some on the floor, as well as some brown smudges and damp toilet paper on the seat. But I figured I didn't have to touch any of that. I just used some clean paper to lift the seat, wiped my hands thoroughly, and then did my business before flushing and leaving the seat up, not wanting to give anyone that might come in the idea that I had left the seat down and peed all over it. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. Enter the homeless man. He had long, dark, matted hair and a matching beard. His face was almost completely hidden. He wore the typical hobo garb, dirt-covered coat, slightly torn jeans, worn sneakers that might have been white at some point, and frayed, fingerless gloves. I gave him a small smile and polite nod as he shuffled past, giving me no more than a quick glance. I was washing my hands by the time he reached the stall he had seen me come out of. I heard him huff and grumble a little before he backed out of the stall and growled, "Nice," at me. I tensed and looked over to him. He was nodding in a thanks-a-lot kind of way, gesturing into the stall as his eyes glared at me between his thick, coarse beard and his bushy eyebrows. Being the extremely awkward and non-confrontational teen that I was, all I could muster was a somewhat spastic, "That wasn't me." Totally convincing. "This wasn't you?" he rumbled, his voice suggesting he was somewhere between confused and furious as he pointed at the soiled toilet. I shook my head, staring wide-eyed at him before quickly rinsing my hands and stepping over to the paper towels. I could see him out of the corner of my eye, still looking at either me or the stall and grumbling under his breath. I was almost done drying my hands when I heard him stomping up behind me. I whipped around and saw him reaching out with his left hand. I initially thought he was reaching to grab some paper towels, but his hand clapped down on my shoulder, his right hand swinging up until his fist was pressing painfully into my chest. He had one of those foldable knives with the serrated edge hovering just above my neck. "You little heathen," he spat through his teeth, his face red with anger. "You think you can just treat me like this because I live in my car? Just because I'm dirty, huh?" he roared, getting louder with each sentence. Honestly, I think I would have peed myself back then had I not just taken care of that. All I could do was stare at him with the classic deer-in-the-headlights look, standing on my tiptoes and trying to press my back into the tile wall behind me to avoid contact with his knife. I wanted to explain that the seat was already dirty when I came in, and that I wouldn't want to clean up some inconsiderate person's mess either. Again, words escaped me, and all that came out was me squeaking, Please don't hurt me." I started to blubber, unable to stop the tears from welling up and running down my face. I guess this shameful display moved him to take pity on me, taking his hand off my shoulder, but he pressed his fist harder into my chest, causing me to let out a choked cry as I closed my eyes and leaned my head back, waiting to feel the blade slide across my throat. I felt him lean in, his foul breath on my face as he whispered, "Next time, I'll make you lick it up." The pressure was removed from my chest, so I suddenly almost fell on my face, but I caught myself, spun around, and ran without looking back. My friends were talking and leaning against the car when I came tearing out of the store. They chuckled at first, asking if I had fallen in, but quickly realized that I was in distress. I told them everything that had happened. Jack, being almost like a protective big brother to me, stormed inside and notified the store's employees. The police were called and ended up catching the homeless man as he sat in his car, parked in the grocery store parking lot. They had him cuffed in the back of their cruiser as they questioned me a few times. I kept glancing over nervously. He never took his eyes off me, staring daggers at me until they took him to the station. He apparently had a few priors of aggressive behavior, but had never pulled a weapon before today. I did feel kind of sorry for him. I have a soft spot for the less fortunate, inherited from my father, and despite him coming within inches of cutting my throat, I felt bad that he had become such an angry person due to his situation, and it was now getting him into deeper and deeper trouble. I don't know what happened to him after that. My friends and I avoided that store and the area around it for the rest of the time that I lived in that state. Jack offered to let me drive on the way to his place, seeing as I had asked him almost every day to get behind the wheel, but I told him that I didn't think it was a good idea right now. My hands were still shaking a little. Right, he said awkwardly. We sat in silence during the drive, and while we ate, turning on the TV for some background noise. Things did pick up as time passed, and it was a decent night after that. I felt a little better as weeks went by, but ever since, I've had the bad habit of wiping down the seats of any public toilet I use, even if it's not my mess. I can just wash my hands after, I tell myself. Now to the homeless man that accused me of looking down on him, pinned me to the wall of a grocery store bathroom, and held a knife to my throat. I hope I didn't make life too much harder for you, and that you are doing well. But just in case you still hold a grudge and possess that knife, I think it's best for both of us to never meet in that bathroom again. So in my third year of college, I had been dating this guy on and off for about a year at this point, and he was gorgeous. Dark brown skin, tattoos, perfect smile, lips, nice body, and everything. He was a student at my university. We studied the same subject and worked in the same field. Luckily for me, he was into curvy white girls with hair down to their butt. We were on and off due to his cheating, but I would continue to take him back. He was so persuasive and charming, I couldn't help myself. He made me fall in love through a cocktail of personality mirroring attentiveness and a huge, grand gestures after a mistake. So one night, about a year into the relationship, we had decided to sleep at my tiny studio apartment in the college town I resided in at the time. I cooked dinner, we watched a Mike's Epps stand-up special on Netflix, had some dialogue about how our day had gone while we weren't together, typical couple things. So we had settled in and finally began to wind down and doze off. I fell into a deep, deep sleep, the kind of deep where you're so asleep that your dreams feel real, and you can feel sensations such as smell, taste, and touch. I was in the grocery store. I was sampling the free samples. Delicious. I was smelling the baked goods. Scrumptious. I ran into my neighbor and we talked about her mom who was going through chemo. Suddenly the cancer had disappeared. I piled my cart high with groceries and enjoyed each aisle, enjoying my time alone. I wheeled myself to the checkpoint, and as I was on my way to the open checkout line, I was stopped by a very tall and seemingly fit and muscular elderly man. Tufts of white hair poked out of the sides of his hair and a puff on his chin. He had either veneers or dentures. He was dressed in a blue with white pinstripes, button-up, short-sleeved shirt with dozens of pens in his shirt pocket. He wore Coke bottle glasses. He smelled of peppermint. He had gently grabbed my elbow and called my name. Nothing in the entire world could have prepared me for what he said once he gained my attention.
"There's someone in your apartment. You need to wake up now. You have to get out."
He repeated himself several times. I left my cart and headed for the exit. He followed me, but not menacingly. He became increasingly louder and began chasing me. Somehow I could feel his concern. As soon as I reached the automatic doors and felt the whoosh of the air through my hair, I sat up in bed quickly in a cold sweat. The clock read 2:47. My boyfriend woke up to me and told me to stop moving around so much. I sprang out of bed, grabbed my biggest knife from the block, and circled through my apartment, throwing on the lights and screaming. I shoved aside drapes, the shower curtain, stormed my pantry, and crawled under my bed. No one. Silly me, it was just a dream. A week later at 2:47 a.m. on the dot, I had escaped my apartment. I saw the time on the stove illuminating my almost pitch-black kitchen as I rushed out the front door and sprinted to my car in a t-shirt, underwear, and barefoot. My boyfriend and I got into an argument that day about his ex calling incessantly. My last message was sent around 6:45 p.m., according to my phone records. I told him I wanted a few hours to myself to gather my thoughts and feelings, so I didn't say things I didn't mean. I turned my phone off, I grabbed a coffee, bought a novel I had wanted to read, and sat at my favorite coffee shop until close. I met my best friend for dinner and drinks. She offered to let me sleep over with her for moral support, but I really just wanted to be alone. I hit the gym until 2. I walked home. 2:10, I was in the door. He was there, waiting for me, furious. He beat the life out of me. He was mad I denied him access to me. The dream flooded my memory as I drove myself to the ER, barely able to see. My eyes were swelling shut. I remember seeing the man throughout the entire store, but never paying any mind. I remember hearing his voice echoing in my ears. I remember thinking in the following days after the dream if I should change my locks or buy an alarm system. I brushed it off. It was just a dream. I couldn't feel my face. Hot blood dripped onto my bare thighs from my face. My lip was busted and giant. My eyes were black and looked like plums, so swollen. He had screamed obscenities at me about how I was out cheating. All these terrible things about me being disrespectful, about how he would put me in my place as a woman. I remained silent throughout my beating that night. Even a whimper would be too much of a reward. He eventually tired out and told me to shower, and we would sleep together. He apologized and told me he would fix it tomorrow. I sat motionless on the floor of my studio, stripped of my clothes, bruised and bloody. He stood and waited for me to head for the shower. When I didn't respond quickly enough, he locked the front door and took my keys into the bathroom and locked the door. I had a spare set. As soon as I heard the water run and the curtain close, I threw on a big white t-shirt I used for painting, grabbed my spare car keys from the cabinet above my fridge, checked the time with a glance, and let the door slam on my way out. I had to be fast. I got to my car, locked the doors, and threw it in reverse. I made it to the freeway and felt my vision failing me. Was I passing out? Was I even going the right way? Hey Siri has never been handier. Turn by turn, I made it to the ER. No idea how long I waited to be seen. I passed out in the waiting room chair. No dream this time. It was a shallow, shallow sleep. I felt them poking and prodding me, taking off my clothes and replacing them. I heard my mother's frantic voice and my father's grunt. He's a man of few words. That old man from my dream was trying to warn me, and I didn't see it. I thought he meant an intruder. I've seen him one other time in a dream, and it was the night my ex was sentenced. I was in the grocery store. He stopped me by my elbow, but this time, all I got was a wink. I wasn't always a kid moving through their adolescence at light speed, wanting to grow up fast and keep up with the lifestyles of those who acquainted me. By age 13, despite still partying young, experiencing the fascinating things the world had to offer, I was still pretty innocent. I played online gaming with people I'd known from school, had a reasonably good relationship with my family who considered me to be on the lower end of the sensible spectrum for a guy my age. That side of me diminished quickly. my personality and lifestyle transforming into the more somewhat independent, rebellious, naive, risk-taking type at the flick of a switch. Experimenting with various hallucinogenics and alcohol was my main priority, with everything else in my life becoming something I had no care for. Years and years of bullying, abuse, neglect, isolation, and alienation had caught up with me, and the fact I had substances to cover all of that up with was, well, at the time, my safe place. The whole world around me became nothing more than a big adventure from that moment onward. I moved cities by myself when I was 14 to pursue a girlfriend I had never even met other than on social media. I stayed in that town for 6 months on and off, acquainting myself with locals of all ages and lifestyles. Still, I felt alone and something was missing in my life. I'm sure we all go through this dilemma at least once in our adolescence and deal with it all in different ways. It's subjective to who we are, the way our brains are wired, who we are surrounded by, our environment. I attended high school briefly in this town where most of my classes I would have my head buried in a book, writing Jim Morrison poetry, along with a bunch of other things that were going on in my inner monologue. My girlfriend had severe mental health issues, to the point where I couldn't even spend time with her without being taken to a cemetery where she would ask me if I would help her bring different names of people home so we could look after them. Her voice would change, and she would fluctuate between the teenage girl she was and from what I presumed to be an infant. An average day would be smoking in the morning, school for as long as I could stomach being attentive to the class without getting too absorbed in my own thoughts, and then over to either one of the 2 or 3 friends I had made to smoke and drink even more until the sun came up. After that relationship ended, I moved back to my hometown and tried my hardest to ease myself into a routine, thinking doing so would balance out my head. I attended therapy, was diagnosed with different psychiatric disorders and medicated for them. Once I was settled in, the partying started again, and new people came in and out of my life. I was smoking more, selling to support my own habit. A certain group of us would love to trip, hoping to achieve some sort of spiritual enlightenment from doing so. We took whatever we could get our hands on. I look back and can't seem to decipher whether or not I reached the level of enlightenment I was hoping to achieve, but I don't care. There were good times and bad times, of course. I got bored and moved from friend group to friend group. I started drinking heavily, attending parties either with other acquaintances or by myself, just floating around our seaside city, lost, confused, and something was missing. A couple of the dodgiest people I'd ever met showed me what methamphetamine was, in which case I wasn't interested. I hated it, due to what I knew it did to your body, mind, and soul, finances, and family. One night I ended up with that one guy, we'll call him Z, and a few of his other friends who I didn't know. I was drinking and tried meth for the first time. I didn't feel a thing and went home that night with a belly full of booze and fell asleep within minutes of putting my head on the pillow. I woke up and realized I had just cut the seal, so to speak, of the drug in which I swore I'd never touch. Now, it would always be an option for me. I knew what I was like. Fast forward 6 months or so, and it was autumn equinox. I was at a dance party, the outdoor type with 24/7 music, ravers, drugs, and mischief. You know the type. I had arrived with some close friends, but after dosing up on psychedelics, I found myself on my own. To put it bluntly, I was off my head. I had no idea where I was, what to do, how to have a conversation with anybody. So after a few hours had passed and the early hours of the morning were dawning, I sat at a big bonfire surrounded by fellow ravers enjoying their night. I mentioned rather loud that I had some Molly if anyone wanted to partake. I was introduced to Jay, who took me to the back of his car, which was full of 3 other people. We spent the next couple of hours until the sun came up using our noses as vacuum cleaners, and all talking at 1,000,000 miles per hour about the most beautiful things we could fathom in our brains at the time. You know, the Molly roll. Lovely memories. I keep in contact with these guys. They had a room at their flat which I was going to fill as I had nowhere else to go, and unfortunately Jay had to go to prison for some charges that caught up on him. My new family were all I had at the time. They were all I chose to have. I was more lost than ever. I'll never forget the first night that it was only myself and the family there after Jay was locked up. We smoked about a quarter gram of meth to ourselves that night, and I fell in love with it. The whole thing fascinated me. The way the product shimmered in the light, how it melted down in the pipe, the feeling you got when you inhaled a huge puff and felt as though you just had a big glass of ice water at your most dehydrated point. I loved twirling the pipe and experimenting with different ways of doing so. I loved the deep conversations, also bringing each other to tears with the connections we felt that night. I loved the feeling of pure dopamine, or overriding my system, not having a care in the world about what's going on anywhere. Emptiness, numbness. Playing PlayStation together until the sun came up, only stopping our conversations and gaming to smoke more or slow ourselves down with some ganja. The next few days were foggy. I didn't want to eat, didn't want to sleep. All we focused on was the fun, in which we called scoring more drugs to go around and continuing our bender. I got really bad at this stage and was isolating myself from the rest of the house. We acquired another roommate, whom I'd known since I was younger. He was worried every day that he'd open my door in the morning so we could have our morning smoke and coffee, that I wouldn't be with us anymore. I was a mess. I started owing people large sums of money, all in which could have risked my life. I knew I was moving too fast, but I was just so alone. Drugs filled that empty space, or so I thought. I met a girl at this point, who I won't talk much about, but to cut a long story short, she was physically, mentally, and spiritually abusive towards me from almost day one, and trapped me in a relationship with her for almost 2 years. Those 2 years were full of partying, the last 2 years of high school, pain, and more pain. After getting her out of my life, the terror starts. I moved back to my hometown and was more lost than ever. I had no purpose. My family and I had long since fallen out because of my life choices over the past few years, and the groups of friends I had were all broken up and people were going their own way. I landed myself a job moving furniture, which tied up my days and brought in the money I needed to survive. I was alone. I felt alone. I'd had enough one day, and Z arrived at my house. He brought out a pipe full of crystals and let me go for it until I felt like my feet weren't even touching the ground. I met other dealers, whom of which let me take meth on credit, which always landed me in so much trouble. I had connections all around me wanting to sell to me, wanting me to sell for them. Every day I smoked, went to work, almost collapsed out of dehydration, trying to keep myself together in front of customers. Things were getting weird. I started to get tired. I could catch myself falling asleep standing up at 4 a.m. in the morning in my room. I was deteriorating. A girl came into my life who was seeing someone else. We became obsessed with each other, knowing full well about her boyfriend, and that made me worse. The guilt was unbearable, mixed with the lust of wanting her all to myself. One day, one of my acquaintances decided we should take a drive. I had drugs on me, and so did he. We ended up getting surrounded by police cars after being parked for around 15 minutes, and I was cuffed and taken away. I escaped with a possession charge. He escaped with nothing. For the rest of my life, that night's going to be the one time I wish I just stayed at home. Life won't ever be the same. I met a dealer through a mutual friend. She told me she had a massive connection and that it was mine on tap if I wanted it. I took advantage of that and used manipulation to trick her into giving me as much as I wanted throughout a month, where she thought I was expecting some sort of inheritance money to arrive. I was loaded. I had pockets full of the drug that everyone knew I desired. Everything. Bottles of liquor, anything you could want. I was the guy to be around. That month or two, I don't think I slept. Many people came and went, had the best times of their lives adventuring around the suburbs and the country at my expense. So many beautiful, messed up memories. Meanwhile, I wasn't okay. I was deteriorating more and more physically, mentally, and spiritually. The psychosis started. Nobody took me seriously when I reached out. The people who were there for the drugs and the company just found it funny. My family didn't have a clue what to do. Therapy wasn't working because I didn't want to stop. What unfolded next was the most terrifying time of my life so far. In the park next to my house, which I could see clearly through my window, I would obsess over people and lights that would accommodate the trees and bushes from the moment it got dark until the moment the sun came up, falling asleep in between, almost destroying my room's walls trying to find hidden cameras and microphones, scaring away everyone who wanted to hang out with me by my terrifying demeanor. I was sleep-deprived, paranoid, and dangerously unpredictable. I never hurt anyone, but people thought I would. I would think drones would fly laps around my house with cameras. Shadows spoke to me, gestured to me. I would hear a knock at the door and think it was someone arriving to end my life. Once the dealers wanted their money that I didn't have, it made things worse. I faced potential boot rides, extortion techniques, and all other sorts of psychiatric torture. Too many people were after me, real, not real. I didn't care. I was gone. After some contemplation, I left town and spent 4 or 5 days up to old habits in a different city. Got death threats for whole new reasons, jaw almost broken by being assaulted for no reason, and ended up homeless. I lost everything. I had hit rock bottom. 2.5 years later, I've been sober of all substances since August of 2017. I'm engaged to my safe place, a beautiful woman I met just after I hit rock bottom. She's my best friend and helps me through anything as I do her. 2 messages for the story. Don't touch meth. Be careful with the consumption of any drugs. You never know what's around the corner. 2. No matter how scared you are, how deep and dark you are down a hole, there's always a way out. There's always a chance of escaping addiction. You've just got to pick the right moment and don't look back. Surround yourself with new people. Set goals. Eat healthy. Move away if you can. Have a fresh start. Loads of support is out there. Never give up. Our neighborhood was very nice. We lived in a northern suburb of Chicago. This all happened from the time I was 5 to 7. Our neighbors to our right were very close to my family. My parents were friends with them, and my brother and I were friends with their daughter, who was my brother's age. My mom babysat for their 4-year-old Sarah and their baby May every day of the week because their mother worked long hours. They also had a son named Christopher, who was 13. He was friends with the neighbors next to their house named JR. Those neighbors were extremely disturbed. They were Filipino, like our neighbor's mom, and her husband was Persian. The Filipino neighbors had a son who was Christopher's age named JR and a daughter who was 16 named Cristobella. Christopher was friends with JR until he did something disturbing and horrible to Christopher's mom. One day, Maria was changing and noticed JR watching her. She set up cameras and caught him pleasuring himself while watching her. He also relieved himself on her back door a lot. Very strange stuff. Maria and her husband ended up moving because they became afraid he would break in or something. Soon after that, my dad's racing bike was stolen by JR. He knew it was JR because he saw him riding it in front of our house. My dad went over to their house to confront their father and get his bike back. The father threatened my father and denied JR stole anything. My father decided it wasn't worth it because of the threats of violence. He did call the police, but nothing came of it. One day, JR's father and another man came to our house and started yelling to my dad to come outside. My mom locked the screen door and asked what they wanted. They told her they were going to beat up my dad because JR had been riding my dad's bike back and forth in front of our house, and my dad yelled at him. Soon after, something horrendous happened. My brother and I had a bunny named Thumper and a guinea pig named Piglet. We left their cage outside during the day and brought them in at night. My family went out, and when we came back, Thumper had been drowned in our kiddie pool, and Piglet had been thrown over our fence and into the alley. The vet said Piglet's internal organs were all damaged and she was dying and suffering. We had to have her put to sleep. My brother, my mom, and I were all crying hysterically. My mother knew who did it because the crazy father had threatened our family just because my father confronted him about his son stealing his really expensive bike. My dad yelled at him, and then her pets had their lives ended by the husband and his friend. My mom went to their house and confronted the father. He laughed and said they were just animals, and the daughters laughed too. My parents called the police, and they said the police were there all the time. My mom can't remember if the husband got in trouble for what him and his friend did. 2 years later, I was in 2nd grade. I was sleeping in my room with my faithful dog, Wrinkles. Suddenly, I woke up to her barking and heard a sound coming from my window. Suddenly, I heard someone say, "I'm going to come in and have my way with you." I ran into my parents' room crying and told them what happened. My dad looked out my window and the screen was ripped. They called the police and they found one of our outside chairs outside my window and shoe prints. They searched for JR because they knew that his family had been harassing us. They couldn't find him. I was terrified to sleep in my room for a long time and slept in my parents' room for a while. My dog saved me. If she hadn't been sleeping with me in my room, I don't know what would have happened. Right after it happened, my parents put up motion detector lights by the front door and lights on the ground all the way around the front of our house and the side of our house. They also put another motion detector light in the backyard right above the back door to my brother's room. Later that year, someone knocked on our door and my mom answered and no one was there, but on the ground was a plate with rice and a dead crow. My mom is convinced it was a curse from the neighbors. I don't know if it was a last hateful act or a threat. They moved a month later and things went back to normal. JR, we better never meet. I'm only saying that for your benefit because if you and I do meet, I'll destroy everything you love for what your family did to mine. You had no respect for women and you terrorized my neighbors into moving and you terrorized me. I also blame you for my pets. They lost their lives because of you and your psychoticness. I hope you have the worst life and that karma has come to you and will destroy your family. I work third watch shifts at my job in a neighboring city, so I don't get off till 2 a.m. That being said, I got off at 2 a.m. like I had every other night I get off of work. Nothing out of the ordinary. It takes me about 20 minutes to get home from work, so I typically just turn up my music and ignore the other cars while driving home. All went the same as it does every night. This particular night was a Saturday, or technically speaking Sunday morning, so there were a few other cars on the road as the bars typically close here around the same time that I get off. I make it to the exit that I take to get off the highway back to my house when I start to get an uneasy feeling in my gut. I see a car behind me get off the highway as well, but shake it off as nothing since there was another car next to me and this is a popular exit/side street that many people take to get home. I make the turn to head towards my neighborhood and this car follows suit. Again, nothing super out of the ordinary since there are a lot of neighborhoods around mine. It wasn't until I got to the street where my neighborhood is located that my gut was telling me, in the strongest way I'd ever felt, that this car was following me. They weren't even particularly close to me or speeding up to catch up to me, but I still felt that something was really wrong. So I turn on the road and speed up to get away from him. His headlights vanish, and I make the turn into my neighborhood and wait at the end of the street to see if he goes past the entrance or not. To my horror, he makes the turn into the entrance and comes towards me. I couldn't let this guy know where I lived, and my neighborhood is one giant square, so I make sure he's following me. I make a left, he follows. I make another left into a cul-de-sac, or a dead end to those who don't know what that is, and turn around and go back the way I came. He makes every move I make, but what almost scares me the most is that when I go straight down the road and past my house, he stops his car directly in front of my house. At no point did I slow down or stop in front of the house, so unless he was following me before, there's no way this guy knows where I live. Now I'm all the way at the end of the long T-shaped road looking behind me watching this guy stopped in front of my house. After a few minutes, he starts to come towards me again and I speed off, making another left. Again, my neighborhood is 2 squares put together with connecting streets, and park my car and shut off all my lights on the street that is behind my house. I thought that by blacking out my car, he would drive past and not notice amongst the other cars parked on the street, but of course I was wrong. He parks his car behind me and proceeds to get out. This man is a tall, burly Hispanic male with lots of tattoos. Remember, it's 2 a.m. and I'm a 23-year-old small white girl who forgot to bring any protection with me, so I'm completely defenseless besides being in my car. And this is the part where I still have a hard time telling my story because I have what I consider survivor's guilt. I feel so stupid for allowing him to even come close to me, but I was in full panic mode and froze up for a minute. He comes up to my window, standing a few feet away, and asks if I know anything about the guy with the big van. My neighbor has a large camper van parked in the driveway next to my house, and that's what he was referring to. My window is barely cracked, enough to where he can hear me but not see me. My windows are super tinted, and it's hard to see in them during the day, nonetheless at night, luckily. I tell him I know nothing about the people with the van. Of course I'm lying because all that's running through my head is, don't let this guy know where you live. He then proceeds to ask me, "You're Mexican, right?" I think this strange question snapped me out of my frozen panic, and I immediately put my car in drive and drive around the corner. I find a spot to hide my car again and black it out for the second time. This time I see his car coming around the corner where he proceeds to go sit directly in front of mine and my neighbor's house. At this point I can see his car, but he doesn't know where I am, and I immediately call the police. As soon as the police turn into the neighborhood, the man drives off, probably seeing them drive down the back road. By the time the police reach me, my whole family and fiancé are outside at this point, as my fiancé had woken up my parents to tell them what was going on. I drive up to the 3 cops to show up and give them my story. Just as the cops were about to leave, the man shockingly drives back around and is met with 3 police officers this time. My mom gets in the car with me and we drive around the corner until my stepdad calls us and tells us the man left, and we're okay to come back and talk to the police. After everything was said and done, the cops had no probable cause to arrest him, so all they could do was tell him to never come back here. I actually work for a police department, so this doesn't come as a surprise to me, just a disappointment. They did tell us the man was crazy, and he made up some nonsense story about how my neighbors owed him $10, and that he was talking to his wife or something along those lines. I don't completely remember his story, but it was something stupid that didn't make any sense, so whatever. We're really good friends with our neighbors who are in their 60s, retired, and happily married. Ever since that experience, my head is constantly on a swivel, and I am always aware of my surroundings. Nothing like that has thankfully ever happened again, but I will never do what I did if it does. Next time I will drive somewhere well lit, like a gas station or a 24/7 store parking lot. That's what I was told was best anyways if it happens that late again. I have never had a gut feeling like that before, and all I know is that if I ever feel that feeling again, I'll have my phone ready to dial 911 immediately. Always trust your gut. Now keep in mind, nothing like this has ever happened in our house before, and nothing since. And I haven't mentioned it to any of my family because they'd think I'm either an idiot or I would spook them. Anyway, now to the meat and potatoes. I was usually the last one to go to bed that summer, and I could never shake the feeling that there was something in the house. Something just out of sight wandering the halls in the dark hours of the night. Never any strange occurrences of note, never any sightings of black figures or apparitions, just this feeling that there was an extra occupant in the house. For a while, this had me nervous. I was losing sleep. I had started to sleep with a small lamp on in my room, just so it wasn't so dark in my room. As the tension escalated, I pulled out my Bible and left it open to the 23rd Psalm while I slept and kept my necklace with the Lord's Prayer engraved on a cross next to me all night. This is at least giving me the peace of mind to sleep. But then, even though it didn't get stronger, the feeling of something being in the house extended into the daylight hours, notably the afternoon. I vividly remember trying to take a nap on a recliner in the unfinished portion of our basement, kind of a man cave area of the house. No one else likes to hang out there, and I kept my guitars and amps there too. It was a sunny afternoon around 2:30 or 3 p.m. on my day off. I was reclined in the chair and half asleep, and the feeling came back, but it wasn't as threatening since I wasn't surrounded by darkness. but rather warm sunlight wafting in through the basement window. I could almost visualize a black humanoid figure just floating and wandering around the passages of our house. Not a threatening or malevolent feeling, but definitely kind of creepy. A little history on the house: it's been added onto at least 3 times, twice before we moved in and once by us. Under my bedroom is a crawl space where the basement did not extend under one of these additions. Around this time, I started to have a reoccurring dream. In the dream, my brother and I would come across a room in the basement that no one knew existed. Upon entering, we noticed the room was just completely trashed and a red, dim orange light hung in the air. There was also the feeling of a malevolent presence in the room. A few weeks later, I packed up and moved into an apartment in my college town, and when I came back home briefly to visit during Christmas and the next summer, nothing. I have never had the overwhelming feeling that something was there or that dream ever again. What could it have been? Can spirits make temporary residencies? Could my dream have been connected? My mom at one point used to brag about being psychic. I myself wish there was another word to describe my own gifts. I'd prefer discernment. Yet, even that word doesn't cover everything I've experienced in my lifetime. But the broad spectrum of paranormal seems to cover a lot of aspects. Growing up in my family, I one day realized my mother would test my gifts. One memory of this: I was 5 years old. I sat on the living room floor playing with my dollhouse. My mother approached me. She asked me if I could locate a wedding ring some family friends had misplaced. My first question was, where was it last? My mother told me it was last seen on the fireplace mantel. I immediately told her it was in the fireplace. She counters by telling me they searched the fireplace already and hadn't found it. Mom, it's in the fireplace. They will have to sift through it or it'll be lost forever. This quiets her. She calls up her friends and tells them exactly what I said. Ironically, someone was coming to clean out their fireplace later that same day. They did sift through the soot and the ring was recovered. In 1986, when the Challenger space shuttle exploded over Florida, our country was rocked. The next day, the picture in all the newspapers were these 2 clouds of smoke with vapor trails. When my mother picked up the paper, she exclaims, "Oh my God!" "What?" I ask. She picks up a sheet of typewriter paper with a picture drawn on it. She holds it next to the newspaper. It was as if though she copied the picture with pencil. They were identical. That picture my mother had drawn had been on the table for 2 weeks prior to the Challenger's tragedy. As an adult, my intuition has at times seemed like a curse. I'll be having what I think is a normal conversation only to find out the person I was chatting with thinks I know something about a secret they've been hiding because, for some odd reason, I'm talking about subjects that has to do with the issue they're trying to hide. Don't get me wrong, sometimes I don't find out till years later. One time I was invited to stay with some people at their house. Their other roommate was this guy who reminded me of the Addams Family TV show. I'll call him Lurch. I thought he must have narcolepsy. Lurch was always nodding off. He'd fall asleep in the bathroom, snoring on the toilet. Then one day, I don't know why or what possessed me to say this, but I asked, "Lurch, it's as if though you're an addict." He treated me with disdain from there on out. Believe it or not, I didn't find out he was an addict until I had left that house. This gift has actually put my life in danger a few times. What's worse is I haven't a clue why they're upset or why they'd want to hurt me. It reveals itself later. When I was in 6th grade, there was a speech contest at my school. Best advice they gave in giving a speech is to tell what you know. So of course, my speech was on ESP, extrasensory perception. I even won 1st place. One day, I'm cornered in the school hallway by 3 boys. One boy says he knows I have ESP. I say, "Please stop, get real." He doesn't give up. "Every example you used in your speech has happened since you gave your speech. There's no way you can prove or disprove your claim," I retort. His face brightens. "I know." He points at one of his friends and says, Guess his locker combination. I can't pick random numbers out of my head and get it right. Give me the first and the last number and I'll tell you the middle number. He agrees. The numbers given are 36 and 12. I reply without hesitation, 24. I was right, and those boys never bothered me again. So my family's had a few weird encounters with black-eyed doppelgangers. An example would be that for 5 years straight on the same day I would see my uncle standing in my doorway staring at me, even when he was on the other side of the country. But that's not the story. This is the most recent incident that happened to my mom, though it was a few years ago. It was my mom's birthday. My cousin and uncle had come over, we ordered pizza and watched movies. As it got late, my mom went to bed and my cousin and uncle left and I settled into bed as well. I woke up abruptly to my mom standing over me, eyes wide, hunched over, as if though she were examining me. There was fear in her eyes. I was honestly afraid at first, thinking that she was going to hurt me. "What?" I asked in a confused tone. My mom's eyes softened like she calmed down a bit when she heard my voice. "Are you okay?" she asked. I replied, "I'm fine. Are you okay?" She looked out of my door and down the long hallway to her bedroom before whispering, "Something was in your room." "What do you mean?" I asked as I got out of bed. "Something was in my room." I was confused, but I'd never seen my mom afraid before. I'd literally seen her fight 6'3" men to defend me, and she wasn't afraid of anything, but she was afraid of this. "Do you want me to go with you to check it out?" Granted, I wouldn't be much help since I was 18 and half her size. She didn't say anything at first. She just stared down the hall with a haunting expression, until finally she said, "I'm not sleeping there tonight. I just need to go get my phone and I'll stay in the living room." I nodded and stepped in front of her and we walked down the hall. When we got to her room, the light was off. I flicked it on to reveal nothing. I stepped inside, looked around, and stared at her. "Nothing's here." But that same haunted expression stayed on her face. She wouldn't step inside her room. I picked up her phone and handed it to her. We went to the living room and sat in silence for a while before she said, "It looked like you." I stared at her with a confused expression. "What looked like me?" I questioned. "Whatever was in my room, it looked like you. I thought it was you. I spoke to it, but its eyes were black. I thought it was a sign you were dead. I thought it meant you were gone." She started crying. I said, "At least that explains why you were looking at me like that when I woke up." "But what happened?" This is what she said. She woke up and couldn't really get back to sleep. While she was laying in the silent room, she heard snoring, but it sounded off, like someone was only pretending to snore. I've had awful night terrors since I was born. It sounds lame, but it wasn't really an outlandish thought for me to go sleep with her when I had one. Thinking it was me, she nudged towards the other side of the bed, saying to shut up. The snoring, however, just got louder as she felt faint breath on her neck. Not only that, but there was a weight now reaching across her. She started saying my name, but realized the snoring had stopped and instead was replaced with the mimicking sound of my name. She turned over to her side, only to freeze when she was met face to face with something that looked and sounded exactly like me, but instead had an ear-to-ear smile and pitch-black eyes. It flopped over on her waist like a rag doll, saying my name over and over again, steadily getting closer and closer before it reached her face. She jumped out of bed and ran to the other side of the house to find me in bed, asleep. We both stayed in the living room that night watching TV, and my mom still hasn't seen the thing that looks like me again. However, I will point out that a week after this incident, when my mom had gone to the races with my aunt, I heard the sound of her laugh coming from her bedroom. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and remember, let's rant with no pants.